Last week kind of rushed at the end, so we decided to just go back to the fourth chapter and talk about it a little bit more and maybe get to talk in depth a little bit more. And I would kind of like to go back to where Jesus is talking about spirit and truth. And then he moves on, after the woman at the well comes to this realization in this conversation with him. Then Jesus talks about the harvest. And then he goes to Capernaum and has an interaction with a man who works for Herod. And so when you think about worshiping in spirit and truth, what are the things that you think about? What does that mean to you? So if I'm worshiping in spirit, what am I doing? What's true? I'm connected. So what was a challenge that was going on at that time with the Jewish faith, the religious leaders? What was their worship? What had their worship become largely? Ritual. What is a challenge for us? How could we get caught up in ritual? Right, so we could get caught up in, think about things that have changed that we've done differently over the years that have made people a little bit uncomfortable. So what are some things you can think of that have been a little awkward or a little bit challenging for someone, maybe for you? That was the first thing I thought of. If you had the communion table right up here at the front, that's what we're supposed to do, right? That table's supposed to be right up at the front because that's the Lord's table. If that were true, if that was necessary, then we should probably all be sitting around it because we're communing with the Lord and with each other, not just picking up the meal and then walking and handing it off. And what are some things that we've had to do lately that have been a little bit different? Virtual church. What'd you say, Sharon?
Spacing us out.
Yeah, spacing us out. It's not touching, which is very difficult to do. Don't you think about and wish for the time when you can just hug people and, express love in a physical way? What are some other challenges that we could get caught up in? We worry about, am I singing the right songs? Who wrote this song? If the church meets on these days of the week, is it law that I'm supposed to be there? Is this room important? Not at all. It wouldn't matter if we were sitting in the grass out here, or if we were in the parking lot behind the store over here across the street, if we were in people's houses today, if we were up there where the basketball goals are. I've had conversations where people are worried about, you shouldn't be eating in the building. Now, it'd be okay if you're up there because that's not the sanctuary or, whatever this special space is that we've designated as the place of worship. But worship in spirit happens where? In your heart. And what conversation does Jesus have with her about that? So they have their temple on Mount Gerizim and the other temples in Jerusalem. They have two temples because the Jews did not want them they didn't want them worshiping together and being a part of that temple, and so they built their own that was, basically a copy or an identical version of the ones that the Jews had. And He points out to her that it's not where you worship. Have you worried about that in your life? Sometimes we have. Sometimes we might point out other people's worship and it being wrong. You know, the way they do it, I don't approve of. Now, how does Jesus balance out this conversation, though? What else does he say is necessary? Truth. Now, the danger that I could have is I could fall on one or the other side of that as being more important. He doesn't say one is more important. He says spirit and truth, which means that they both go together. So they don't have the truth, though, do they? And he makes it, he's not afraid to tell her, you don't have the truth. So where are they lacking in truth?
Well, Mark 7 and 8 is a good example for us today in a way. They worship me, teaching his doctrine, the precepts of men, neglecting the commandments of God, who hold to the traditions of men.
So Mark 7 and 8, they worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. So that's something we got to be careful of, isn't it? We have to be very careful that we don't turn our expectations and this is the way I'm used to it being done, into that's how it has to be done. And if you don't do it that way, you're wrong. So that we have to be careful about that. But we also have to be understanding that emotion, being all emotional, doesn't mean that you have depth. It doesn't mean that you're true. It doesn't mean you're following the truth. The emotion and spirit and connectedness is important, but it can't be one or the other. So holding back from being emotional because I'm scared that if I show emotion, I'm going to be seen as dangerous is wrong. We're not to worry about what the other person next to us is judging about me while I'm worshiping. We're supposed to be worrying about worshiping God, not, am I going to bother somebody if my hands go up? Because it's not about them determining whether my worship is acceptable to God, right? You worry about yourself, not judge another man's servant. So spirit and truth are very important, and he points out to them that they don't have truth. Truth comes from the Jews. So pilgrimages to some place, going to the Jordan River to be baptized, having candles and incense and wearing robes and doing all kinds of things to make it feel like what I'm doing brings me closer to God doesn't bring you closer to God. It may do something in you for you emotionally, but it does not make you more in the Spirit. So, the preacher doesn't matter. Mark, I'm sorry. If we get caught up in Mark leaves and goes somewhere else, and then we have to go find a different church, we were at the church for the wrong reason, weren't we? Style. Yeah, I really need to find a church that I can just connect with, because that's the style of the way they worship there just doesn't do it for me. That's a struggle, isn't it? We go through that because we're human and we want to feel something. So he makes sure that she understands that it's spirit and truth. Now, he aggressively approaches this situation, and he's the one asking for a drink, but then he flips the tables and quits talking about his need for water. He has walked 20 miles. Would you be thirsty and tired after a 20-mile walk that wasn't on a sidewalk or a nice paved road? So physically he's tired, but he approaches her, quickly flips the tables and says she's really the one who needs a drink. And now she's really kind of short with him. I mean, a Jew wouldn't even drink out of the cup that the Samaritan drank out of. When it says in here, dealings with, that's not just that I'm not going to interact with you. I wouldn't eat off the utensil you're eating off of, because you're defiled, you're unclean. Here he's wanting to drink out of a cup that she would use, and that just couldn't be possible. But she's going to be the catalyst, one person leading many other people to believe. Now the disciples show up, and what do you think is on their minds? He shouldn't be talking to a woman by himself. She's a Samaritan. Now, something that's interesting that I've not really heard people talk about is they didn't seem to mind going into a Samaritan village or city and buying food. So obviously the ones who had the Jewish background had learned something from Jesus about, we're not going to worry about whether the food is defiled or how it's been handled. When we need to eat, we're going to eat. So that, to me, I've never really heard anybody talk about that, but he told them to go get food. They're in a place where they're going to go buy food from Samaritans, and there's no mention of any worry about that. Now they come and they catch up to him, and do they ask him any questions? No. That stands out to me a little bit. What does that say about them and their relationship with him? They trust him. I couldn't hear what you said. Would you?
I'm saying they're trustworthy.
They trust him. Now, if my faith is immature, what do? I question and I worry, and I have to have a full explanation of everything. If my faith is more mature and as I grow, then I start to accept that I don't need to know everything. It becomes really a lot simpler, doesn't it? If I'm worrying about everything, then things are getting complicated. But the more that I can just trust in God and what Jesus is doing, then, okay, he knows what he's doing. I'm sure they're concerned or they're wondering or they've got questions in their mind, but they accept that he's doing what he's supposed to do. And they're really wondering about him eating. Again, think about you walking 20 miles. You'd probably feel like you needed to eat. What are his thoughts about needing to eat right now at this time? I've got more important things to worry about. I think it brought him joy to have that conversation with her. And I mean, he knew what was going to happen, but in the human side of him, that it's there to experience the emotion of this person and the stuff that's happening within her that he knows. He knows what she's thinking. He knows her heart. He can see probably the tears. It probably brought some tears to his eyes in that interaction with her, and he's forgot about worrying about food. He's not even thinking about food right now. So, what is his food?
Doing the will of him who sent me.
doing the will of him who sent me. And what is the will of his Father that sent him? To seek and save the lost. And that's feeding me, because that is really regenerating me, making me feel like I'm ready to go do more. I'm ready to go have more conversations. And I know what's getting ready to happen as a result of this conversation that I just had with her. So she runs off. She leaves behind her water pot. What do you imagine those water pots look like? If you saw that video that I showed the clip of last week, those are big water in between, and she's probably carrying a couple of them hanging from that rod. They're large. I think she just forgot about whatever she was doing because she knew who she just encountered, and the water became unimportant. So she runs to the village or the city, and what do you imagine happens? There's some clues in the way she says what she says. So her mind, do you think that she just is going to say or take it on face value that if I go tell them what happened, they're just going to believe me? And no. Now, look at the change in who she is in this conversation with these men. Do you think she would have gone and approached? So if you're at they're probably at this city gate, the entrance to the city. They're sitting, they're talking about whatever it is that they think they need to talk about that's important. She would be she would really be interrupting them, and they would not have time to talk to her. If she just came to approach them to have a conversation with them, they would have nothing to do with her. And she wouldn't do that. If that were the case, if she wouldn't be there at the well by herself anyway. So she approaches them, and does she say, I just met the Messiah? She met a man who told me everything I ever did. Now, if she said, I just met the Messiah, what might their reaction be? You're crazy. And they would probably ignore her. But they know, I'm sure they know what she's done, because it's not like they're in, a big city. They probably have known her for a long time. They know about all the stuff that's going on with her. And here she is, confident in front of us to tell them that I just met somebody who told me everything I've ever done. And they're immediately, they need to know who this person is. And so I think, there are some things that you pick up here from just her interaction with them. She does say, could this be the Christ? Now, in the interaction where the disciples are talking to Jesus about eating, he switches up subjects. And what's he begin to talk about? The harvest. What would the harvest look like? If you looked out over a field, what would the harvest look like? Yeah, you would probably see evidence of things white or in bloom or whatever that would tell you it's time. Now, what's happening as he's having this conversation with his disciples? People are coming, and how are they dressed? Largely, they're probably wearing light-colored clothing. You see them off in the distance. The harvest is starting to show up. So it's like looking out over the field at the harvest. Have you ever been where, like when we drive to go to Pensacola, we get to some fields where cotton is all. Did you see that? Yeah. It's really pretty, isn't it, to see all that cotton out there growing? And that's what I thought about when I was reading this and thinking about it. It's obvious. You know, it's not like you have to go take a close look to see when things are ready. Well, the harvest is walking right out to them, right out to find out who this man is. Is this the Christ? And that's why he starts to talk about this. The fields are ready. And he knows what's going to happen that day, doesn't he? So he says, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Do not say 4 months more and then the harvest. I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. Even now the reaper draws his wages. Even now he harvests the crop for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Thus the saying, one sows and another reaps, is true." When he says, don't say 4 months more and then the harvest, what's he saying to them? It's now. Don't look for some sign of something that's going to come and, well, you know, it'll be, I think if we wait a little bit longer, those people will be ready. Maybe in 6 months, that town, that city, that village, maybe it'll be ready then. We probably need to do a little bit more prep and planning. And he's saying it's ready. What do we know Jesus says is the biggest challenge with the harvest? Not having enough people to even go out and work to take care of it. So look, it's ready. Even now the reaper draws his wages. Even now he harvests the crop for eternal life. So there's two parts to this, two pieces to this. Who are the two people involved? The person doing the sowing and the person doing the reaping. So who has done some sowing in the background of these people's lives? Moses. They're familiar with reading the work of Moses and his writings. That's been some sowing that has taken place. Who else could have they interacted with that interacted with people who were not Jews prior to Jesus coming? They might know who John the Baptist is. There has been sowing happening. The prophets. Yep. So she thinks Jesus could be a prophet. So she's familiar with Moses, the prophets, maybe John the Baptist. So there's been a lot of sowing happening.
They could have heard rumors about Jesus also. That could have been.
Yeah, they could have heard rumors already about things that Jesus had been doing. You know, people are traveling around, for commerce, for whatever reasons, there would be talk about this man who has been healing people and doing things. And so, there's a lot going on here. So verse 39, many believed. Verse 41, more believed. This never took place in a village in Israel. What took place here in this Samaritan village, never took place in a village in Israel. In his own hometown, they tried to stone him. And this passage, this talks about him being the Savior of the world. That's not been talked about prior to this story. And I mentioned last week that he sets the pattern for his disciples of Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the world. And that's the pattern that he wants them to follow. So he stays on for 2 days, and they believe, not just because of what she said happened, but because they heard his words. And you know that they have to wonder, why would a Jew be coming through our village? Why would a teacher be coming to see us? So after 2 days, he left for Galilee. And Jesus, it's, a little side note here, Jesus himself had pointed out that a prophet has no honor in his own country. So he goes to Galilee, and the Galileans welcomed him. Why do you think they welcomed him? Yeah, hey, here's the miracle worker is back. And that's why they care about Jesus. So they're happy to see him. They had seen all he had done in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, turning the water into wine. And so then this man shows up wanting to talk to him and wanting a healing to be done. The rest of this passage is completely about believing. And that's what John's gospel is about. It's about belief. So if you look at other religious faiths, what are the things that matter in those faiths? Doing, what your works are, the steps that you take, attainment, enlightenment. It's about you doing something. This, the only true faith is the one that believes, the one that he said, all you have to do is ask. When he talked to the Samaritan, all you'd have to do is ask. And what happens? It's free. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, something we don't have or can't see. Why do you have faith? You can't see Jesus. You didn't see him do his miracles. So this man shows up. He has walked about 20 miles. He is a nobleman, a man who belonged to a king. Well, the king in that area is Herod. And so, we know Herod didn't like John the Baptist, or was a little afraid of him, was interested in him, but was kind of intimidated. He's also afraid of Jesus. He wanted to have him killed. This man has heard of Jesus. He's aware of what's been going on. His son is sick. He believes Jesus is a miracle worker. And so he knows it's worth me going to try to get him to come take care of my son. So he walks the 20-mile or so trip because he knows Jesus is someone who heals people. Beyond that, we don't really know if he knows anything, believes anything, because Jesus challenges his faith. Jesus sees him as being just like the rest of the people that he calls out in this conversation. Do you remember what Jesus said about Capernaum and comparing Capernaum to Sodom? If Sodom had seen what Capernaum had seen, they'd still be around. That's pretty harsh, isn't it? We don't see anything in Capernaum like we know was going on in Sodom, but They would have changed their hearts and changed their minds and been different people if they'd have seen everything you've seen. So verse 48, he says to them, and he's saying this, I think, loud enough that people around are aware of what he's saying. Unless you people see signs and wonders, you won't believe. You want healing. You want signs. He's challenging their faith. What challenges your faith? Is it conditions around me? Is it whether I'm getting financial blessings, my job is working out, illness, death? All kinds of things can challenge our ability to hang on to our faith. Sometimes, for some people, that helps us to draw closer to God and to rely more on God. This group of people was not relying on him for anything other than what they hoped to get out of him being there and healing people. And he knows that this man's faith has to start somewhere. What frequently moves people to faith is desperation. Maybe you put off going to the doctor your whole life, but now you're sick and you need to go to the doctor, and so you go because you're desperate. So something that's interesting here as we wrap up, he challenges the man to have faith. And he tells him, go, your son lives. So what happens at that moment? He's healed. The man doesn't know that, but he decides at this moment, I'm going to trust. Now, I don't know if you picked up on this before or not, but in the conversation that he has with his servants, what do they say about the healing? Yeah, they told him when, but what did they say? When did they say it happened? Seventh hour of when? Yesterday. Now, if I'm lacking faith, what do you think I would do? I'd go there immediately. I could make a 20-mile walk today if I needed to. He didn't even do that. He spent the night. Because Jesus had this conversation with him yesterday. So what does that say about what happened with that man's faith? He believed. He believed so much that he didn't even travel back home that very day. He waited until the next day. So he believes, and then what happens? His whole household believes. His whole household could include who? Yeah, if you're talking about somebody who in this culture, you're talking about their household, it's people who are his servants or his slaves. Probably extended family lived with him. And this is what kind of household? It's not a Jewish household. So there's a lot more going on in faith outside of the Jewish people right now. This is really kicking things off and getting things started in going on out to the whole world. And they came to faith, not that Jesus was a miracle worker, but in who he was, and that the gospel is for the whole world. Any other thoughts?
One of the things that struck me is that this is the first of Jesus' miracles, or it's called the second miraculous sign. Obviously, he's done more than that.
Yeah. he doesn't have to be right there with that person to touch them or whatever. He can say it and it happens. Yep. Awesome stories in this chapter, aren't they? I mean, a lot to think about. I think we are out of time. Appreciate your comments and